all gonna die.
So it's September, you know what that means? American Horror Story time. I was pumped for this night. I couldn't wait to get home to watch the first episode of AHS 1984. This is one that I've been looking forward to for a while, ever since they announced what the theme of this was. And I've been watching this show from the beginning since it started in 2011. There were some highs and some lows, but I am anticipating that this will hopefully be my favorite, or one of my favorite of all the seasons. And tell me in the comments below, what did you think of tonight's episode? I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you think this might be one of the better seasons, because the last few haven't been as great as they were when the show first started. What I love about this show is that you can watch it anywhere you want. You don't have to start right at the beginning of season one. That's the beauty of an anthology, and I just love that we have different stories for each season with the same actors for the most part playing different characters. And as I already told you, there are some seasons that I was kind of disappointed in, like Cult and Roanoke weren't what I thought it would be, whereas ones like Coven, which is my favorite season so far out of all of the seasons, and Murder House is quick close second to it. Just every one of them had a different environment that relates to the horror genre. You had a murder house, you had an asylum, a coven, a freak show, Roanoke, you had a hotel. The Apocalypse was one from last year, and you had a cult. This year is like probably the best example for horror, and that's 1980s. And that's exactly what this show does from the very beginning. It feels like you're in a 1980s movie or show, and that's what Stranger Things did. It had that nostalgia of the 1980s, and I feel this year and the last few years, it's very cool to look back on the 80s. It's that retro feeling, and you see that a lot now in movies and shows, and even in Halloween Horror Nights, if you've been there, you see that it's full of that nostalgia. And even the opening intro of this show, where we see the opening credits, it has these little clips from the 1980s, and even the music. That's something I want to get into, the technical aspect of the show. Starting with the music, I loved how it sounded like something out of Friday the 13th or anything you would hear from the 1980s. And just the look of this show, the wardrobe choices, just the hairdos of the characters, and just the mannerisms of certain people. It just feels so authentic to that decade. Aside from the cultural influence from that decade, you see a lot of inspiration from other horror movies, and not just movies of the 1980s. It's obvious, though, as I already mentioned, that it has a very much of a Friday the 13th feel to it. You can tell Ryan Murphy gained inspiration from that because obviously they're at a Camp Redwood. Camp Crystal Lake was Friday the 13th. There's a killer, Jason, that's murdering the counselors there. That's what's happening in this show. And it's obvious that he is using that as a template, that franchise. But I noticed other movies that were possibly influenced in order to make the show. I don't know whether he did this on purpose, but it's things that I picked up on. There's one moment where the van is traveling to Camp Redwood, and they hit that guy that was apparently one of the victims that had his ear chopped off, and it reminded me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, both the original and the remake, where the kids are driving the van, they encounter that one girl in the remake. In the old one, it's a guy, and they were one of the victims previously to Leatherface. So it's something that I picked up on. And also the killer collects ears. He's chopping off the ears, kind of like what Leatherface did, collecting the skin off of his victims. Another one is when Mr. Jingles is escaping from that mental institution, and this reminded me of Halloween 1978, the original one, how Dr. Loomis is driving into the mental institution and he sees all of these patients and they've escaped. And that's the same thing that happens in this one, where we see Mr. Jingles. He escapes, but he let all these other inmates out as well, and they're all just roaming around. And it was just cool that they possibly may have just gained influence from that, because I mean, that's the first thing that popped in my mind, and I just thought that was awesome if he did that on purpose. And lastly, this is one that possibly I'm only thinking of as something maybe he gained inspiration from. I could be totally wrong, but the look of Mr. Jingles, he's wearing that long raincoat, and it almost looks just like the killer from I Know What You Did Last Summer. Now, this could just be a coincidence, and this is probably one of the more least known horror movies compared to other ones that have come out before it. I mean, this came out at the same time as Scream, but a lot of people know this movie. But I mean, I couldn't help but see him in that same outfit, that same look. So, I mean, that could just be a coincidence, but those are things that I picked up on, how this show not only relates to Friday the 13th, but all these other great horror movies. But when combining the feel of the 1980s with the 1980s slasher flicks into the mind of Ryan Murphy, I thought he did a great job with the first episode, and it's just the premiere, so I mean, we'll see how it goes as we get into the next few episodes. But when comparing it to the other seasons, this one does feel a lot different, and maybe it's because so far it feels that he is purposely gaining a lot of inspiration from other horror movies, whereas the other ones, they felt a bit more original and they weren't really focusing on anything precisely in regards to a specific horror movie. Another thing that I noticed that makes this show a bit different comparing to the last few seasons is the cast. Now, we have a very strong cast. For the most part, a good chunk of them have been throughout the last few seasons. We've seen them here and there, but there are a few that are either having smaller roles or are not returning at all. I'm talking about Evan Peters and Sarah Paulson. And of course, Jessica Lange was one that was fantastic. The last time we saw her was in season 4, and we've been hoping to see her again. She had a smaller role in Apocalypse, so we kind of knew that she wouldn't be coming back for this season. But Evan Peters will not be in this season at all, and Sarah Paulson is going to have a minor role. We don't know when we're going to see her, but it won't be as prominent as it was the last few seasons, and that's unfortunate because she's actually my favorite thing about the show. Jessica Lange and Evan Peters are great, but something about her way of showing her different characters, the versatility of it, was just amazing. I can't even tell you what my favorite character that she played. I love them all. So I can't wait to see what she does in this season, even though it won't be a big role. But in regards to the cast that we have a pretty strong cast. You have Emma Roberts, you have Billy Lord, you even have Matthew Morrison, which is kind of surprising to hear him be on the show because I am used to seeing him on Glee. I have watched that, and he worked with Ryan Murphy on that show because Ryan Murphy created that one as well, and it was just weird to see the role that he played in this episode, and whatever he does from here on out is going to be strange, and it's so unlike Matthew Morrison, but it's kind of cool to see him try different things, so I'd like to see where that goes. But we have a strong cast, so I have faith in these people that are portraying these characters to pull us through this season without the likes of Evan Peters or Sarah Paulson. So we'll see where it goes from there, but I see some promise into these characters that they're creating. Lastly, I want to mention the storyline. Now, it starts off straightforward. It's a guy named Mr. Jingles that's killing these counselors at this camp. I don't think it's just going to be about that. There has to be more to it than this guy just murdering these people. And as we've seen throughout the last few seasons, it starts off straightforward with a certain storyline that we might be familiar with. And most of the time, by the time you get to the middle, it takes you for a loop and in an unpredictable way, it takes you in a way that you were not expecting. A good example was Roanoke. For me, I did not enjoy the direction it took. I was thinking something totally different by the time we were at episode 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there. And by the time we were taken in this totally different area, this different direction, it felt like a different show. One of the reasons I didn't really like it. Some of the other seasons did a little better with that. And with this one, I know there's something's going to happen by the time we get to the middle. It can't just be this guy killing people. So I'm hoping I'm not disappointed when comparing it to Roanoke. I hope it's not another Roanoke, but I hope it's something like maybe Coven or even Murder House, some of the earlier seasons, because I felt the first few seasons were really, really good. And their stories were constant, and some of them was kind of unpredictable. But it did it in a way where it didn't exactly lose interest for me. It kind of made me wonder what's going to happen next with having the same objective that I felt from the very beginning. But I think we're at a good start with the first episode. Good characters, a good premise, great environment, and just a really awesome feel of the 1980s. I think that's really the main reason why I'm loving it so much. I mean, I was born in the 80s, so I enjoy this period. So I'm enjoying where it's going to go. And it's Halloween time officially now because American Horror Story is back. So I'm excited. Hope you all are all as well. Tell me in the comments below, what did you think of this week's episode? Don't forget to subscribe to hear more from me regarding not only this review, but also talking about movies and more, where anything is possible.